The day my parents' will was read, my world shifted. I found out my little brother was left their $800,000 New York mansion, while my share was a collapsing, half-forgotten cabin somewhere in rural Alaska. That night, in our small apartment kitchen, my fiancé tossed the engagement ring onto the table and called me a pathetic excuse for a partner. He shouted that I would never become anything, then slammed the door hard enough to rattle the whole frame. For a few seconds, I believed him. I believed all of them. It felt like that moment was the final page of my story, when really, it was the first chapter. I'm Olivia Hale. Most of my life, I've been the person who knows how to fade into the background. My family raised me to understand that love wasn't equal. There were expectations for both children, but Marcus got the spotlight and I got the shadows. Marcus was the adored one from the very beginning, loud, confident, magnetic. I was the quiet daughter who learned not to expect attention, who found comfort in being dependable rather than celebrated. I still remember bringing home an English essay in high school that my teacher called brilliant. I set it on the dinner table like a secret I hoped someone would discover. My father barely glanced before turning to Marcus with excitement over his next basketball game. My mother squeezed my hand under the table, trying to make up for what wasn't said. It wasn't enough, but I pretended it was. Nothing changed as we grew up. Marcus walked through life as if every door was built for him. I learned to wait on the doorstep. He got the brand new sneakers, the expensive schools, the applause for accomplishments I often worked harder to achieve. I convinced myself it didn't matter, that love didn't need to look balanced to be genuine. I learned later how wrong I was. In my 20s, I built a quiet life in New York. I worked long hours in data analysis, taking pride in the things people rarely noticed: precision, consistency, calm. I wasn't flashy, but I was solid. I thought that would be enough. When Daniel came along, he said he admired that about me, how thoughtful and grounded I was. I clung to those words like promises. But slowly, admiration turned into comparison. He'd look at Marcus's lifestyle, his job, his tailored suits, his constant travel, and ask why I didn't aim higher, dress differently, or push myself harder. I laughed it off. That's what I'd been trained to do: swallow the hurt, smooth the edges, keep the peace. I mistook endurance for love and silence for strength. Then the will was read. I walked into the attorney's office with a small flicker of hope I barely let myself feel. Maybe my parents had seen me more clearly than I believed. Maybe my mother had fought for something fair. Marcus walked in like the outcome was already written, and as it turned out, he was right. He inherited the mansion. I inherited a rundown cabin in Alaska, so dated the attorney paused before handing me the deed. Marcus grinned. My stomach dropped. And for the first time in my life, I questioned whether the version of my family I'd built in my head had ever been real. By the time I made it home, Daniel already knew. Marcus had told him because of course he had. News traveled quickly when it made me look small. Daniel stood in the kitchen with his arms folded tightly across his chest, jaw clenched like he'd been waiting to unleash everything he'd rehearsed. So that's it? He snapped before I'd even closed the door. Your brother gets a mansion, and you get some rotten shack in the middle of nowhere? I told you it was a cabin, I said, though my voice betrayed me. He let out a harsh laugh. A cabin? Do you hear yourself? He started pacing, agitated and restless. I'm killing myself trying to build a future, and you're dragging us backward. I tried to explain that I hadn't chosen any of this. He cut me off, louder each time, until it felt like the walls were shrinking. You know what Marcus said? Daniel went on. He said your parents were being realistic. They knew who the smart investment was. The words sliced right through me, not just because he said them, but because he believed them. Memories crashed over me, cheering alone at Marcus's games, my father forgetting my birthday, relatives praising me for being sensible, which was just another word for forgettable. Daniel wasn't finished. You need a reality check, he hissed. You're never going to accomplish anything if you keep living like this. No drive. No ambition. Just settling. Settling. It was the truth I never wanted to face. I had spent my entire life settling for less love, less attention, less space, less everything. He stepped closer, his frustration almost vibrating off him. Do you really think I want to marry someone who brings nothing to the table? Someone who's always second in her own family? Something inside me didn't explode. It quietly cracked open. A slow, silent breaking that felt like the first breath after being underwater too long. That isn't fair, I whispered. Daniel scoffed, ready to unleash something worse. Fair? Olivia, you. Take a hard look at where you are, he said. Almost 30, and what do you have to show for it? No savings. No direction. Nothing ahead of you. Even your parents seem to realize that. And honestly, I'm finally starting to see it too. The sting wasn't in the words themselves. It was knowing he had probably felt that way for a long time. The apartment suddenly felt too tight, like the walls were moving in. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out his voice. I wanted to defend myself, to remind him of the late nights I'd worked, the sacrifices I'd quietly made, the times I held us together when he was crumbling. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Men like Daniel didn't value effort. They valued outcomes. They counted success in money and status, and I had neither. He yanked his coat off the hook with a sharp, final motion. I'm not signing up for this, he said flatly. I'm not tying my future to someone who drags me down. Especially when your own parents didn't think you deserved more than some broken cabin in the middle of nowhere. He stepped into the hallway, turned back, and delivered the sentence that would echo in my mind for days. You're a pathetic loser, Olivia. The door slammed a heartbeat later, and somehow the silence he left behind hurt more than anything he'd said. I stayed on the kitchen floor long after his footsteps faded. The ring he had thrown earlier glinted weakly under the table, but I couldn't bring myself to pick it up. My hands felt too heavy, weighted with the fear that maybe every word he said was right. The stillness in the apartment wrapped around me, suffocating. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator and someone laughing distantly in the hallway, proof that the world outside continued moving even as mine seemed to have stopped. His voice replayed in my head, word for word. Pathetic loser. You'll never be anything. No future. Each phrase landed in my chest like stones, sinking deeper each time I inhaled. And worst of all, beneath the pain, was a truth I'd never dared acknowledge. He wasn't the first person to make me feel small. He was just the first to say it plainly. I drew my knees to my chest and buried my face against them. The tears came hard and fast, real ones, the kind I hadn't let myself cry in years. Not the controlled, quiet tears I'd learned to hide. These were the kind ripped from a lifetime of swallowing my pain, my father's indifference, Marcus's effortless wins, the relatives who called me sensible like it was a consolation prize. And now this. The final confirmation. It seemed that I wasn't worth much at all. When the crying finally stopped, the apartment felt colder, emptier. I forced myself to stand, grabbed a towel, and wiped my face, like I was erasing the last trace of the life I'd been trying too hard to fit into. My reflection in the microwave door looked hollow, but not defeated. Something inside had shifted. Quietly. Irrevocably. Not out of anger, more like hitting a point so low there was nowhere left to go, but up. I went to the bedroom, opened my laptop, and hovered over Daniel's contact photo, glowing on the screen. For years, I'd reshaped myself around his expectations, making myself smaller, quieter, more convenient. But the truth settled over me with sudden clarity. Love was never supposed to shrink you. And if it did, losing it wasn't a tragedy. I shut the laptop and opened a travel site instead. One destination came to mind, Alaska. At first it felt absurd, a decaying cabin in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of winter. But the longer I stared at the search results, the more inevitable it felt. I couldn't rebuild anything from this apartment. I couldn't breathe here. I couldn't stay in the place where everything in my life had just crumbled. If that cabin was all I had left, then I needed to see it for myself. I bought a one-way ticket. The next morning, I packed a single suitcase and left the engagement ring on the table without a note. The flight was small and noisy, rattling through heavy clouds. Hours later, a driver in an old pickup took me down narrow, icy roads that cut through untouched land. When he finally pulled over, he nodded toward a dark line of trees. "Cabin's about a mile in," he said. I stepped out, the cold slicing through me as the wind howled across the empty landscape. As I trudged through the snow, a slanted roof finally appeared through the trees. It looked exactly like what everyone believed I deserved: forgotten, broken, barely standing. At the door, I took a breath and pushed. It stuck, swollen from years of storms, but eventually groaned open. A blast of icy air and the smell of damp would hit me immediately. For a moment, I didn't move. This was what I'd been left with. My inheritance. My worth, according to the people who claimed to love me. Inside, the cabin sagged beneath time's weight. The floors dipped, the walls bowed, and snow blew in through a shattered window, dusting the floor. A fallen chair lay collapsed in the corner, like it had surrendered long ago. My footsteps echoed softly as I walked inside, stirring old dust into the thin light. I crossed my arms over my chest. "So this is who I am," I whispered. The cabin didn't answer. It never would. I set down my bag and began moving debris. I didn't fully know why. Maybe instinct, maybe desperation, maybe the need to control just one small part of my life. I cleared one corner, then another, until sweat prickled beneath my jacket despite the cold. Then, as I swept the center of the room, the broom thunked against something solid hidden under the rug. I froze. Kneeling down, I pulled the rug back. Dust billowed up, and beneath it was a wooden hatch, with an iron ring set flush into the boards. My heart hammered in my chest. I paused, uncertain. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was dangerous. But a small, stubborn part of me, some instinct I couldn't ignore, urged me forward. I lifted the ring and pulled. The hatch groaned open, releasing a rush of icy air from the darkness below. A narrow staircase disappeared into shadow. I flicked on my flashlight and descended slowly, each creaking step sounding unnervingly loud. At the bottom, my boots hit firm earth. The beam trembled as I swept it across the room, and my breath caught. Crates, dozens of them, stood stacked with deliberate precision, aged wood reinforced with iron, untouched by time except for a thick layer of dust. In the corner, a large trunk waited like a secret too important to be hidden. Hands shaking, I approached the nearest crate. A rusted pry bar on the floor slipped under the lid, and with a groan the wood gave way. Inside, cloth bundles lay neatly wrapped. I picked one up, unwrapped it, and gold coins spilled into my palm. Cold, blinding, real. My heart hammered in my chest. Another bundle held jewelry, glittering with antique stones that caught the light of my shaking flashlight. Another revealed silver bars stamped with dates decades old. I stepped back, gasping, the cold biting at my lungs yet barely noticed. Wealth, astonishing, unimaginable wealth, filled the space. Slowly, I spun in a circle, letting the light reveal edges of metal, glimmers of gold, crates filled with secrets I had never imagined. I whispered into the darkness, "What is all this?" My attention turned to the trunk. With every step, my hands trembled harder. I lifted the lid. Inside were ledgers, yellowed pages filled with names, payments, land rights, and resource claims. My family name appeared repeatedly. Timber, minerals, contracts worth more than anything Marcus had ever bragged about. Beneath a stack of papers, an envelope caught my eye. My name, written in faded, familiar handwriting. My knees threatened to give way. I opened it carefully. The paper crackled, and for a moment, I could almost hear her voice, as if my mother was there. "Olivia, if you are reading this, we are gone. There's something we never said enough. We always saw your strength, not loud, not showy, but steady, deep. You care about meaning, about integrity, about what lasts. Marcus cares about appearances. We gave him a home he could show off. But this history, these rights, this responsibility, this is yours. We trust your heart. Remember that. Love, Mom." I pressed the letter to my chest as tears blurred the words. The air around me felt warmer, or maybe it was just the first flicker of being truly seen. All those years I thought they overlooked me. All the times I believed Marcus was the chosen one. Daniel making me feel small. None of it had defined me. My parents had entrusted me with what truly mattered. I wiped my face, glancing around the cellar. This wasn't just treasure. It was validation, a message, a rebirth. I held a gold coin in my palm, feeling its weight. A laugh escaped me, quiet, trembling, but real. "I'm not a mistake," I whispered. "I'm not an afterthought." The cabin above groaned, but the sound now felt different. Not threatening, acknowledging. I climbed the stairs slowly, clutching the letter like it was part of my heartbeat. Back in the main room, the wind rattled the broken window, curling snow across the floor. I stood in the center, breathing deeply. Betrayal, discovery, truth, they all settled around me. Daniel's voice flashed in my mind. Pathetic loser. Marcus smirking at the attorney's office. Years of whispers that I was less. I exhaled. They were wrong. For the first time, I felt power, not loud, not vengeful, just steady and undeniable. The kind you carry quietly. The cabin, cold and broken, no longer punished me. It marked a beginning. Over the next 2 days, I cataloged every crate, every ledger. My notebook filled with dates, values, resource rights. I contacted experts under an assumed name, quiet and careful, leaving no trace for Marcus or Daniel. Each confirmation anchored me more deeply in my new reality. Marcus called twice, boasting about his mansion. I let the calls go unanswered. Daniel sent a message saying he wanted to talk. I deleted it unread. For the first time, I acted on my own terms. I wasn't defined by their expectations. I wasn't the overlooked daughter. I wasn't second place. I was the keeper of the true legacy. When I left Alaska, my mother's letter rested safely in my bag, and I carried a steadiness I had never known. The world hadn't changed. Marcus still flaunted his wealth. Daniel still chased appearances. But I had changed. The cabin hadn't broken me. It had made me whole. If you had uncovered a secret like this hidden beneath your past, what would you do? Share your thoughts and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter.